For my graduation. My mom and brother kept saying, "We've got something special planned." On the big day, they never showed up. Instead, they posted photos from a beach resort with the caption, "She'll understand." I didn't say a word, but after I shared a picture with my dad's side, I got over 200 messages. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd share something like this. But I guess, when the people who are supposed to show up for you decide you're not even worth that much, you start telling your side of the story. My name's Rachel. I'm 22. And while on the surface, this might seem like a story about my graduation day, the truth is, it's not just about a day, or a ceremony, or a diploma. It's about years. Years of holding my breath, of shrinking myself into the smallest version possible, of telling myself that if I just worked harder, smiled quieter, stayed invisible enough, maybe one day my family would finally see me. But they didn't. And deep down, I think I always knew they wouldn't. I just wasn't ready to face it until that day. The day they promised something special. The day I told myself not to expect too much, and still, they managed to let me down in ways I hadn't prepared for. Because when I stood there in my cap and gown, scanning the crowd, they weren't late, they weren't stuck in traffic. No. They were hundreds of miles away, sipping cocktails on the deck of a 5-star resort in Mexico, posting sun-kissed photos with the caption, "She'll understand." And the thing is, for the first time, I didn't argue, I didn't beg, I didn't cry. I just posted a picture of me and my dad. And I woke up the next morning to over 200 messages. But this story isn't about the messages. It's about the realization that changed everything. They were never going to see me the way I deserved. And I was finally done pretending they would. I grew up in a town that looked like something out of a postcard, the kind of place with tree-lined streets, picket fences, and neighbors who smiled too wide and asked about your day even when they didn't really care for the answer. On the outside, everything seemed perfect, almost painfully so, like a movie set where nothing was out of place. But behind the doors of our meticulously kept house, the cracks ran deeper than anyone could see. And if you listened closely enough, past the hum of small-town pleasantries and polite nods at the grocery store, you might have heard it, the tension that hung in the air like an invisible thread stretched too tight, always one wrong word away from snapping. My mom, Marjorie, played her part to perfection. At church, at the PTA meetings, at every bake sale and fundraiser, she was the mom everyone wanted to be, charming, elegant, the woman who always had the best homemade lemon bars and the most polished, curated life. But at home, it was a different script entirely. She never yelled. That wasn't her style. Her weapons were quieter, sharper, dressed in guilt trips and cold silences that lasted days. You never quite knew what you did wrong, only that somehow, you had. And then there was Kyle. My older brother by 3 years, the golden boy of our household. He could skip school, flunk a test, come home past midnight without explanation, and still, somehow, he was just going through a phase, or under a lot of pressure, as Mom would say with a sigh heavy enough to make him seem like the victim of his own reckless choices. Me? I was the straight-A student, the one who never broke curfew, the one who filled the silence with perfect grades and volunteer hours and summer jobs. But no matter how hard I tried, it never seemed enough. Marjorie barely blinked when I brought home awards, but the moment Kyle mentioned he might start a podcast or had an idea for a business plan he never finished, she beamed like he'd invented the cure for cancer. And I told myself, for years, that maybe, just maybe, if I kept my head down, if I played the role right, one day she'd look at me the way she looked at him. One day she'd say, "I'm proud of you, Rachel." And I guess that's the cruelest kind of hope, the one that keeps you hanging on even when you know better. By the time senior year rolled around, I should have known better. I should have known that some doors, no matter how hard you knock, just aren't meant to open. But there's something about graduation, the caps, the gowns, the speeches about new beginnings, that makes even the most jaded part of you want to believe in something. Maybe that's why, when my mom started calling more often than she had in years, dropping hints about how Kyle and she were planning something unforgettable for after the ceremony, I let myself hope. Against every shred of caution I'd built over 2 decades, I let that fragile, aching part of me believed that maybe, just maybe, they were finally going to show up for me. The calls were short, but they came more frequently. She'd end them with lines like, "Don't make too many plans after the ceremony, honey. We've got something special waiting for you," in that syrupy tone she only used when she wanted me to think everything was fine. And Kyle? Out of nowhere, he sent me a text that read, "Trust us, Ratch. You're going to love it. Just don't book anything, okay?" Followed, of course, by his signature winking emoji that always managed to feel more condescending than playful. And because I was so desperate to believe, because I wanted to feel, for once, like more than an afterthought, I clung to every word, every promise, every carefully crafted breadcrumb they left. I started imagining what it could be. Maybe a small dinner at the local bistro downtown, maybe a surprise gathering with some relatives I hadn't seen in years. Maybe, just maybe, they'd finally look me in the eye and say what I had spent my whole life craving: "We're proud of you, Rachel. We see you." I told my dad about it over dinner the night before the ceremony. He and Maria had flown in from Oregon, booked a cozy little hotel a few blocks from campus, and treated me to a quiet meal at a tucked-away Italian place that smelled like garlic and fresh bread. He looked at me across the table, the candlelight catching the gray at his temples, and when I told him about the surprise, he just raised an eyebrow. "Did they tell you what it is?" he asked carefully. I shook my head. "No, they just said, it's special." He nodded slowly, said nothing more. But I could see it in his eyes, that look of someone who wants to protect you but knows you need to learn some lessons on your own. The next morning, I woke up early, earlier than I needed to, really, but I guess part of me was too wired, too restless, clinging to the fragile excitement I hadn't let myself feel in years. I had laid my gown out the night before, the deep navy fabric still crisp, untouched by creases, the cap sitting neatly on my desk like some kind of fragile crown I wasn't sure I deserved to wear. I took my time getting ready, doing my makeup more carefully than usual, straightening my hair until it gleamed like I imagined it should for a day that was supposed to matter, for a girl who wanted, just for once, to feel like she was the one being celebrated. At exactly 8:14 a.m., the first notification buzzed on my phone. I remember the exact time because it was the moment everything shifted, the moment hope cracked open and spilled into something else entirely. It was a text from my mom. No emojis this time, no cheerful exclamation marks, just cold, sterile words that sat heavy on the screen. Something came up. "We'll explain later. You're going to be amazing. Love you." That was it. No call, no voicemail, no apology, no last-minute dash to campus. Just that one clinical message, vague and final, like they were canceling dinner plans, not skipping out on one of the biggest days of my life. I sat there on the edge of my tiny dorm bed, my cap balanced on my knees, my shoes still untouched by the door, and for a long time, I just stared at that screen, waiting, hoping, that maybe the real message was coming next, the one that said, "Just kidding, we're already in the parking lot." But it never came. It was Maria who knocked gently on the door, her voice soft, careful, like she already knew. "You ready, sweetheart?" she asked. I swallowed hard, forced a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes, and said, "Yeah. Just need my shoes." She didn't push, didn't ask if I was okay. She just lingered for a moment longer than usual, her gaze resting on me like an offering of comfort she didn't want to force but wanted me to know was there if I needed it. The drive to campus was quiet. My dad tried to fill the space with small talk, about the weather, the crowd, how proud he was, but I barely heard him. I just kept glancing at my phone, knowing nothing new would appear, but checking anyway, like some part of me hadn't given up yet. Like some part of me still foolishly believed they might change their minds. They didn't. The ceremony itself passed by in a blur of faces, speeches, and the sound of names echoing through the auditorium, each syllable blending into the next until they all felt the same, like background noise in a life where I had always been just another supporting character. I stood in line with the other graduates, smiled when I was supposed to smile, walked when I was supposed to walk, and when they called my name, I crossed the stage, shook the dean's hand, and forced a grin for the photographer who couldn't know, that inside I felt like I was floating somewhere just outside of myself. And when it was over, when the clapping faded and the crowd spilled out into the sun-drenched courtyard, I stood there in my cap and gown, surrounded by families hugging, taking selfies, holding signs that said things like, "We're proud of you," or, "Class of 2025 rocks." And I felt like I was watching it all from behind glass. My dad wrapped me in a hug that lasted longer than any I could remember. Maria fussed with my cap, made me laugh when she scolded Dad for blinking in the first photo she took, and for a moment, I let myself lean into them, into the simplicity of two people who, despite all the years of silence and mistakes, had shown up. They were here. That was more than I could say for the others. It wasn't until lunch, at this tiny cafe tucked away behind campus, the kind with mismatched chairs and handwritten menus, that I checked my phone again. I wasn't expecting much. Maybe a half-hearted "congrats" from Kyle or some recycled message from my mom. But what I saw took the breath right out of me. There they were, my mom and Kyle, reclining on pristine white loungers, sunglasses reflecting a turquoise ocean that stretched into a sky so blue it almost looked fake. They were on the deck of some luxury yacht, cocktails in hand, sun on their faces, not a care in the world. The caption read, "Sometimes the best gift is peace. She'll understand." And in that moment, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't feel anything at all. I just sat there, my phone heavy in my hands, staring at the screen like if I looked long enough, the image might shift into something else, something that made sense. But it didn't. That night, after the gown was folded and tucked away in the closet, after the makeup was washed off and the congratulations quieted to a hush, I sat alone on the edge of my bed, the glow of my phone the only light in the room. The post was still there, mocking me, daring me to react, but I didn't. Not yet. I couldn't find the words. Instead, I posted the picture Maria had taken, just me and Dad outside the cafe, me holding my diploma, him with his arm draped over my shoulder, both of us smiling in a way that felt honest, simple, unforced. I didn't write a long caption, didn't call anyone out. I just wrote, "Grateful for the ones who show up." I didn't expect much from it. Maybe a few likes from friends, some casual congratulations. But by morning, there were dozens of comments, messages pouring in from people I hadn't heard from in years, classmates, old neighbors, even Kyle's friends, all with something to say, some variation of, "What happened?" or "Are you okay?" But one message stood out from the noise. It was from Aunt Lori, my mom's younger sister, the one who had always seemed like a distant relative at best, polite but never close, the kind of family who sends a Christmas card but not much else. Her message was short, almost cryptic. "If you ever want to know the truth about your dad, call me." I stared at the message for a long time, thumb hovering over the screen, heart pounding in a way that felt different from the numbness I'd been carrying. I hadn't thought about the divorce in years, not really. I only knew what Mom told us, that Dad left because he couldn't handle responsibility, that he walked away from us without looking back. It was a story Kyle had told over and over until it became a kind of family folklore. I had never questioned it. I never had the courage to. But now something cracked open inside me. It took me a full day to find the nerve to call. When I finally did, she answered on the third ring. "I was hoping you'd call," she said, and there was something in her voice, soft, almost sad, that made me brace for whatever was coming. We talked for 2 hours. I won't spill every detail here, partly because I'm still unpacking it all, but what she told me, it reshaped everything I thought I knew. About my dad. About my mom. About the money that mysteriously disappeared my senior year of high school. About the court orders my mom ignored, the visits she canceled, the letters she never let me read. About how the story I'd been fed was never the whole truth, maybe not even close. When I hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there, the phone in my lap, staring at the wall, the pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed now scattered at my feet. And somewhere deep inside me, something hardened. I wasn't going to let them control the narrative anymore. In the days that followed, I didn't respond to the comments, the messages, the shallow apologies disguised as explanations. I let them sit there, like static on a broken radio, background noise I no longer cared to tune into. I didn't open Kyle's message right away either, though the preview lingered on my lock screen like a splinter. Don't blow this out of proportion. It stayed there for hours, like he was daring me to react, baiting me to fall into the old patterns of justifying, excusing, minimizing. But I didn't take the bait. Instead, I opened my laptop. At first, it was just a few lines, notes, fragments, dates I scribbled down so I wouldn't forget. But then the notes became paragraphs. The paragraphs turned into pages. And before I knew it, I wasn't just writing a letter to myself, I was compiling a story no one had ever let me tell. I went through old text messages, emails, photos buried in folders I hadn't opened in years. I pulled receipts from when Mom sent me money in high school, only for it to mysteriously vanish when Kyle needed another investment. I found the emails Dad had sent me during college, the ones I was too scared to answer, the ones where he tried to reach out after years of silence, apologizing for not fighting harder, for not knowing how to be a dad back then. And I realized something powerful. While they had been living in their curated world of half-truths, social media facades, and well-rehearsed stories, I had been quietly watching, documenting, collecting the pieces they never thought I'd put together. I wasn't writing a tell-all post to expose them in some petty, revenge-fueled spectacle. That was never what this was about. I was writing for me, for the girl who spent too many nights wondering if she was the problem, if maybe she was too much, too emotional, too demanding for them to love. I wasn't anymore. So, I wrote it all down, my side, the one no one ever asked for, the one I had been too scared to believe was valid. I didn't need to name names. I didn't need to scream. The truth, laid out plainly, was loud enough on its own. And when I finally shared it, not publicly, not to the whole world, but to the people who had reached out, the ones who asked if I was okay, the ones who had only ever heard their version, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Control. Not power in the way they wielded it, not the manipulative games or the silent treatments, but real control. The kind that comes when you stop waiting for someone else to tell your story and start writing it yourself. For the first time, I wasn't the supporting character in their narrative. I was the one holding the pen. And maybe it was the silence, the stillness where I neither argued nor justified, neither begged for understanding nor tried to smooth things over the way I always had, that unsettled them the most, because suddenly the calls started coming, not just from Mom or Kyle, but from numbers I didn't recognize, numbers that turned out to be relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, voices from a family tree I had been pruned out of long ago, all singing the same tired song in slightly different keys. Insisting I was overreacting, that I was blowing things out of proportion, that this wasn't how family handled its business, that I needed to stop making everything so public, so messy, so uncomfortable for them. But I let the calls ring out into nothingness, let the texts accumulate like unopened bills, and for once it didn't feel like avoidance, it felt like liberation, like I was finally stepping out of a cage I hadn't realized I'd been living inside. Until Kyle called again. And this time, I answered. His voice, when it came through the receiver, was tight, clipped, sharp around the edges, that familiar tone of condescension he used whenever he thought I was being too sensitive, like he was still the older brother and I was still the little sister who didn't know better, and it almost made me smile, because he still thought this was about sibling rivalry, still thought he could guilt me into submission the way he always had. "What is wrong with you?" he demanded, not even pretending to open the conversation gently, his words tumbling over each other in that practiced way of his, all frustration and indignation layered with just enough fake concern to make himself sound reasonable. "You didn't have to make this a thing, Rachel. You didn't have to drag us into the mud like that. We were just doing what's best for us. Why can't you just accept that?" I let him talk. I let him rant and fume and throw his recycled lines at me like they still held power, like I hadn't heard them 1,000 times before, and when he finally ran out of steam, I took a breath, not to steady myself, but to claim the space he always tried to fill with his noise. "No, Kyle," I said, my voice quiet but unshaken, a calmness that came not from weakness but from the certainty that I no longer needed his permission to feel the way I felt. "You don't get to rewrite the story this time. You don't get to tell me what's best for me or how I should process what you and Mom did. You never cared about how it affected me, not once, as long as you and Mom were comfortable, as long as the story stayed neat and clean and suited your version of the world. And there was a pause then, long and heavy, as if the words took up so much space that even he couldn't squeeze past them, and maybe for the first time in his life, he realized he didn't know how to answer, because the Rachel he was talking to wasn't the girl who used to wait for his approval. Finally, after what felt like an entire lifetime stretched between us, he exhaled, a sharp, clipped sound, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer, smaller, and yet still so predictably hollow. "Fine," he said, like a man surrendering not out of understanding, but because he had nothing left to say that could make him look good. "But I'm not going to apologize for it." And I knew, in that moment, I was done, not out of anger, not out of bitterness, not because I needed him to apologize, but because I no longer needed anything from him at all. I ended the call, not with a dramatic gesture, but with the quiet, steady certainty of someone who has finally walked out of a room and closed the door behind them, and the silence that followed wasn't a void, wasn't emptiness, but a space I had finally claimed as my own. In the days that followed, the noise faded, not entirely, not all at once, because there were still the occasional texts from Kyle, vague, passive-aggressive little breadcrumbs he couldn't seem to stop himself from dropping, and there were still the sporadic messages from Mom, always longer, always carefully worded, laced with just enough regret to make her look noble but never enough accountability to feel like an apology. But I stopped checking them obsessively, stopped holding my breath every time my phone buzzed, because I realized, finally, that they weren't going to change, and more importantly, I no longer needed them to. It was my dad who broke the silence first. He hadn't been part of the drama, hadn't inserted himself into the mess, but when he called, I could hear it in his voice, that cautious, almost hesitant tone of someone who had spent too many years on the sidelines, someone who wasn't sure if he was allowed back into the game. "Hey, kiddo," he said, and for the first time, it didn't feel like small talk. "I saw what's been going on. I just wanted to ask if you're okay." And maybe it was the way he asked, simple, direct, without judgment, without telling me how I should feel, that cracked something open in me, because for the first time, I told him everything. I told him about the messages, the betrayal, the years of feeling invisible, the lies I had swallowed whole because it was easier to pretend the story they told me was true than to face the lonely truth that they had never really seen me, never really cared to. And he didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't tell me to forgive them or to be the bigger person. He just listened. And when I finally ran out of words, when my voice cracked not from sadness but from the sheer weight of carrying it alone for so long, he was still there, on the other end of the line, steady, grounded, not running away this time. "I'm proud of you, Rachel," he said, his voice thick with something I didn't recognize at first but then realized was sincerity, unvarnished, messy, human. "I should have told you that a long time ago. I'm sorry I didn't." And maybe that's the thing about family, maybe it's not about who shares your blood or your last name, but about who shows up when it matters, about who listens without trying to rewrite your story, about who holds space for you exactly as you are, no edits, no filters, no conditions. For the first time in years, I believed him. And it was enough. In the weeks that followed, I packed my things, not just the tangible belongings that had filled the corners of my tiny apartment, but the invisible weight I'd been carrying for years, the expectations I had clung to like armor, the hunger for approval that had once dictated every choice I made. And as I taped boxes shut and folded clothes into suitcases, I realized how much lighter everything felt now that I wasn't dragging them with me, now that I was no longer waiting for a message, an apology. A gesture that would never come. I moved to Portland, started a new job, a new chapter, a new version of my life that wasn't built on the scaffolding of their approval, and every day that passed without hearing from them felt less like a loss and more like a release, like I had finally stopped watering a garden that was never going to bloom, like I had finally stopped knocking on a door that had always been locked from the inside. And no, they didn't change, not really. Kyle sent the occasional performative message, "Hope you're doing well," laced with just enough passive aggression to remind me he still thought I was the villain in his carefully edited story. Mom sent a long email once, longer than anything she'd ever written to me before, filled with carefully selected phrases about moving forward and family above all else, but even in those carefully chosen words, she still managed to dance around the truth, to sidestep the responsibility, to protect the version of herself she needed to believe was blameless. And I didn't respond. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but because I no longer needed to. I no longer needed to play a role in a play I had never written, no longer needed to perform for an audience who had already decided how the story ended. I had written my own ending. And maybe the greatest revenge isn't loud or dramatic or public. Maybe the greatest revenge is choosing to live well, to move forward, to create a life that is full and honest and entirely yours, without needing anyone's permission or validation. So if you're watching this, if you've ever felt like you were standing on the outside of your own family's story, waiting for someone to finally see you, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me sooner. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop waiting, close the chapter, and write the next one yourself. And trust me, it's okay if they're not in it.